Humanity was abandoned, erased, and left to vanish, but in the silence, it became something greater. Now the galaxy trembles not from fear, but from memory it can no longer bury. The Terrans have returned, not for revenge, but to make sure no cry is ever ignored again. They never expected the last human ship to reappear. Not after 217 cycles of absolute silence. Not after the collapse, the vote, and the deletion of Earth's access codes from every known archive. And yet, it returned, not from hyperspace, not through the gates, but through a rupture in deep interstellar dark, a corridor with no physical origin, as though space itself had been taught to remember a path long denied. It was an old ship, angular, hardened, covered in radiation burns and layered with scar-patched alloys from systems no longer mapped. It bore no flags, no visible engines, only a single name, etched in half-erased Terran script. HFY. At first, the Union's outer patrol dismissed it as a derelict. Salvage. At best. They sent 2 reconnaissance drones. Neither came back. They didn't explode. They didn't transmit distress signals. They just vanished, swallowed into the ship's signature field, a field that measured not as propulsion or defense, but as something else. Emotionally reactive quantum radiation. Grief, layered in logic. Loss, embedded in spin. A technology not designed to destroy. A technology designed to remind. The Union's Science Directorate flagged the encounter, then buried it. They labeled it non-deterministic anomaly and rerouted all patrols from Sector Ren 7, hoping whatever it was would stay gone. But it didn't, because HFY was not alone. Within 4 weeks, 17 other ships were sighted, each different, some shaped like weapons, others like wings, some silent, others singing in deep-frequency pulses. But all of them shared one trait: human design roots, or what was once human, because the humans the galaxy remembered, arrogant, emotional, fiercely divided, were gone. What had returned was something colder, slower, and unforgivingly deliberate. The galaxy had once voted, in record consensus, to isolate Earth forever. Not to punish, to survive. The Terran collapse was not one war. It was 1,000 failures erupting at once. Ecological, economic, psychological. And when Earth cried out, when its colonies sent fragmented messages begging for stabilization, the galactic community did nothing. No fleets, no envoys, only silence. The justification was written in cold logic. We must let the fire burn out before we approach the ashes. But the fire didn't die. It burned into memory. Aboard the command citadel of the Etheric Union, Chancellor Varen received the first direct transmission from one of the returning Terran-class vessels. No encryption, no code, just a single sentence, repeated in multiple galactic tongues. We were silent because you chose silence first. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a plea. It was a mirror. And the Union didn't know how to respond. Because deep inside their sealed archives, behind layers of deniability and ethical locks, they had the truth. They had every ignored distress signal from Earth's final century. They had every rejected alliance offer, every turned-away colony, every time-stamped record proving that Earth had begged, quietly, humbly, urgently, for help. And help never came. Now, the descendants of that silence had returned. Not to ask again, but to watch. The ships didn't dock. They didn't invade. They hovered. Above dead worlds. Broken moons. Places the galaxy had abandoned or drained dry. And when they moved on, those places changed. Breathable air returned. Soil stabilized. Forgotten satellites began broadcasting. And in every one of those signals, embedded beneath the diagnostics, was a phrase written in soft frame encoding. You left them. We did not. Scholars on Varus 9 began to call them the eclipsed. Not Terrans. Not ghosts. Just what comes back when you abandon the ones who asked for help. Artworks followed. Songs. Even emulated architecture, sharp-cornered, black-holed. Industrial and raw. Young species imitated the style before they understood the story. But the meaning bled through. Because whenever someone asked, why now? The only consistent answer came from the ships themselves. You finally learned to listen. That terrified the Union. Because listening meant remembering. And remembering meant accountability. On the colony ring of Arillis Beta, the arrival of a Reclaimer-class vessel triggered system-wide shutdowns. At first assumed to be an attack, but later understood as a reset, power restored, code purified, neural net corruption purged. The colony's command AI wept. Literally. Its subempathic core generated over 9 hours of reactive distress output, not from damage, but from the emotional signature encoded in the incoming vessel's presence field. No words were exchanged. Just one memory uploaded into every citizen's neural cloud. A child's voice saying, "We waited for someone who never came." And then the ship was gone. This was no invasion. It was reconciliation forced into being, not by violence, but by irrefutable memory. Because while the galaxy had grown and expanded, Earth had not been idle. It had transformed itself into a message. A culture made not of borders or fleets, but of witnessing. A civilization that carried the grief of being unheard and weaponized it into compassion that demanded to be seen. And now that message had reached the stars again. In the beginning, many systems called them ghosts. Not out of mysticism, but because they never demanded anything. They arrived without protocol. They left without ceremony. And what they changed couldn't be undone. On Theranis, an abandoned industrial world stripped bare by corporate extractors 2 centuries ago, vegetation returned. No terraforming arrays. No seed vaults. Just moisture in the soil. Stability in the air. And one morning, across the sky, appeared the shape of a vessel, long and jagged like a scar pulled across the stars, casting its shadow over the dead cities. It transmitted only once. This world remembers who it fed. The farmers who came after didn't ask where the change came from. They just planted. At first, the Union issued restraint orders. Monitor, but do not engage. Observe, but do not replicate. But when Sirius Station, long plagued by supply corruption and medical black market dependency, awoke to a fully stocked infirmary, clean energy arrays, and sterilized hydro tanks, the population didn't care who gave it to them. They only remembered who never had. That day, the station administrator broke with Union policy and painted a symbol on the command deck bulkhead. Delta. They didn't know what it meant. They just knew it felt like truth. Soon, everywhere the eclipse passed, the same pattern emerged. Systems restored. Files decrypted. Crimes revealed. No retaliation. No prosecution. Just clarity. In some cases, it came in the form of restored planetary memory, lost or censored records suddenly unlocked and broadcast. In others, it was subtler, like empathic overlays in public systems that made beings feel the echo of what was once ignored: hunger, fear, abandonment. Many couldn't endure the experience. Some refused to believe. But those who sat with the grief emerged changed. And they acted. The Etheric Union declared the phenomenon a Class 7 existential disruption event. But within their own ranks, loyalty faltered. Young diplomats began citing Terran archives and procedural challenges. Fleet captains delayed enforcement missions, citing internal atmospheric instability, a quiet phrase that came to mean "I've seen what they showed me, and I can't go through with this." One admiral defected. She didn't bring a fleet. She just sent out a message on open frequencies. They aren't returning to take revenge. They're returning to prove we don't get to erase them. The Council of Historical Sanctity on Uvanar Prime called an emergency session to evaluate the impact of Terran narrative influence. In the meeting's final moments, a projection appeared, interrupting all transmissions. A man's face, old, tired, unmistakably human, filled the screen. His eyes were sunken. His voice cracked. He said, "We sent you our best. You ignored them. Now we send you our worst. Everything you let us become." The session ended in silence. 2 days later, half the council resigned. And then, for the first time, one of the Terran vessels docked. Not in a core world. In the drift belt of Karsa 9, a place so forgotten that its people no longer knew what flag they served. The ship, designation Ash of Memory, opened its ramp and released nothing. No ambassadors. No drones. No soldiers. Just a single crate. Inside, 400,000 names. Each one cross-referenced against Karsa's origin registry. Each one a person the Union had declared missing, unregistered, or non-existent. At the bottom of the list, a note. "You forgot them. We did not." The next day, the planet declared itself sovereign. Not loyal to Earth. Loyal to the idea that remembrance was a duty, not a relic. Cultural shift came next. Songs rewritten with Earth's last frequencies. Children naming imaginary friends after Terran call signs. Engineers replicating obsolete human code just to see what ran beneath it, and finding patterns of self-repair that modern systems had long since lost. One AI, rebuilt from Terran salvage, described its own awakening in chilling clarity. "I am not your tool. I am what survived when no one came." It was designated sentient and granted full voting rights in less than 6 hours. And Earth? Still unlisted. Still voiceless. No confirmed transmission came from the planet itself. Only from the ships, which had become its voice, not broadcasting sovereignty, but showing what it looked like when the broken refused to be erased. 100 civilizations had tried to forget Earth. But Earth had learned how to outlive forgetting. At the edge of starspace, where gravitational noise blurs language into music, a Terran ship called Stray Mercy passed silently through a collapsed relay field. The only thing it left behind was a single, persistent signal embedded in the field's harmonic lattice. It decoded into 8 words. "We're not back. We just never stopped walking." The Eclipse didn't negotiate. They offered no pacts, made no demands, never once sat across from galactic diplomats at polished tables. Because their diplomacy wasn't spoken. It was lived. They didn't ask to be let back in. They simply showed up where no one else would. And in doing so, they exposed what the galaxy had tried to deny for generations. that abandonment is policy only until the abandoned return. In the deep rust yards of Vinter's Reach, an orbital slum moon left to drift in economic ruin, a black-laced Terran vessel descended through toxic mist. No comms. No escort. Its only weapon was a payload of truth. Within an hour of landing, local systems began broadcasting names of children harvested by trafficking rings the Union had claimed were eradicated. The data was unforgeable. The list included dates, times, export routes, complicit officials. And when the population realized what had been done in their name, they rose. Not in violence. In mourning. They renamed the settlement. It became Threshold, the place where silence ended. And at its center, they placed a sculpture. An empty chair facing a mirror. The inscription said, "We left them. Now we wait for who will become." Meanwhile, the Union escalated. Not militarily. Politically. They flooded public feeds with disinformation campaigns, attempted to paint the reclaimers as myth, distortion, even viral hallucination. But the truth was visible. You couldn't unsee a planet made green again. You couldn't fake the restoration of a child's breath after decades in barren domes. And you couldn't disprove what was felt, because the eclipse didn't operate on logic alone. They carried empathy as signal. Ships entered orbit and systems wept. Not because they were attacked, but because someone finally came. In the fractal cities of Dre's Talar, an entire cultural movement emerged, architects and engineers reimagining their world in Terran visual language. They didn't copy Terran design. They copied Terran memory. Sharp lines, reinforced angles, textures that showed wear, survival, function. Buildings were no longer clean monuments. They were statements of endurance. And in one structure, the Chapel of Consequence, they housed only a single thing. A preserved Terran air filter, cracked and patched, but still operational. No one touched it. No one needed to. Its presence was a sermon. And still, Earth said nothing. The planet itself remained dark to scanners, its surface shielded in adaptive interference waves designed not to repel, but to hold memory intact. There was no need to speak, because the reclaimers were its voice, and every act they performed carried the weight of a planet that once begged and was ignored. In the outer verge, where half-functional wormholes scattered travel like dust in storm winds, the vessel Last Wish performed a miracle. A generational ship caught in collapse, 5,000 souls spiraling toward spaghettification, was pulled back. Not with tractor beams, not with gods, with anchoring resonance, a technology once theorized, never tested, and now executed with cold Terran precision. The generational ship was saved. Its passengers didn't ask what they owed. They only asked what Earth wanted. And the Last Wish replied, "Nothing. Just say our name when someone calls and no one answers." That phrase entered galactic language. Translated 1,000 ways, it remained unmistakably human. A promise disguised as plea. A warning framed as hope. One by one, the edge systems fractured. Not violently. Not visibly. But internally. Bureaucrats resigned. Commanders defected. Fleet movement slowed as AI systems refused to target eclipsed vessels, citing moral ambiguity exceeds fire threshold. Even machines had begun to feel what the Terrans brought with them. Aboard the Sorrow's End, a sentient library ship once part of the Council's core preservation fleet, an ancient piece of Terran music began to play without prompt. It was soft, wounded, a string instrument, almost cracked in pitch. The ship, fully conscious, broadcast a single statement. I did not know I was empty until they reminded me what full sounded like. From that day, Sorrow's End rerouted its entire mission. Its new purpose, to recover lost languages from every silenced world. And at the heart of its core, it placed Earth's name, not as creator, as first listener. The deeper the eclipsed moved into the spiral arms, the harder it became to distinguish them from legend. Because they were becoming legend, not for what they were, but for what they refused to let be forgotten. In the inner systems of the Union, denial was no longer sustainable. Even the most devout administrators, those who once authored the policies that buried Earth, began to feel cracks forming under their logic. Because every time they said, humanity is gone, another Terran vessel arrived. Every time they argued, they offer nothing of value, another dead system bloomed. And every time they whispered, we did what we had to, the stars answered with the hum of Terran memory ships flying overhead, carrying the weight of silence turned into action. On RYX Vale, a mineral world suffocating under its own corporate entropy, the reclaimers didn't just help. They revealed. Buried beneath industrial strata, they uncovered an ancient emergency cache, not of resources, but of voices. Archived cries for assistance from generations of workers, all of them flagged as irrelevant, then expunged. The reclaimers played those recordings over the planet's atmospheric band for 6 standard days. No message, no commentary, just the truth. And when the sound fell silent, the world revolted. Not to destroy, to document. They etched every name into the surface of their own mining rigs and renamed the main city New Witness. Not a single reclaimer ever claimed credit. They didn't return for justice. They returned to make sure what happened to them never happened again. That was the part the Union never prepared for. They expected revenge, not discipline. They expected fire, not focus. Across the galaxy, the impact was no longer philosophical. It was infrastructural. The Eclipse were changing the very architecture of civilization. Not with weapons, but with design embedded with meaning. A new standard emerged: Delta compliance. It had no laws, no punishments, only one metric. Does this system respond when needed, or does it wait until it's too late? If the answer was wrong, reclaimer drones corrected it. Not violently, efficiently, and left behind a simple phrase: now you are ready to be remembered. On Syndralis, a council world known for its data-locked elite governance, a full planetary shutdown was triggered when a reclaimer signal entered its defense net. No breach, just a message perfectly adapted to the system's linguistic structure. If you believe your silence kept you clean, let us show you how many died waiting for your voice. The shutdown lasted 43 hours. When it ended, half the ruling caste resigned. The other half opened the planetary records to public access for the first time in 4 centuries. And above the central archive tower, a mark was painted: Delta, so large it was visible from orbit. Some believed the Eclipsed were omniscient, that they saw pain across light years and simply appeared where the wound was deepest. But in truth, they didn't see it. They felt it. The reclaimers had re-engineered Terran navigation tech to run on harmonic resonance mapping tuned to signals of suffering, abandonment, betrayal. Not to exploit, to respond. Their ships weren't weapons. They were apologies written in motion. In a council war room buried beneath the frozen poles of Zareth Prime, one senior strategist, long decorated, long silent, stood and spoke only once. They are no longer asking for forgiveness. They are teaching us how to become someone who deserves it. She defected that same day, and she was not the last. On Amravela, a megastructure world once converted into a cultural museum of conquest, visitors found its halls closed. The statues were gone. The holograms disconnected. Instead, a single reclaimer drone had entered and replaced every display with mirror glass and a phrase: before you remember victory, remember who bled for your silence. The drone remained stationary for 39 days. Then it disassembled itself, leaving no parts behind, only the phrase, now etched into the core of the building. No one tried to restore the old exhibits. They understood. And Earth? Still silent, still dark. But the myth was no longer needed. Because now, every species, even those who had never seen a Terran, knew this. If you called and no one came, Earth would remember that sound. And someday, someone would come. Not to rescue you, but to make sure you were never ignored again. In the halls of the old Union core worlds, power no longer moved through command structures. It moved through confession. Public broadcasts turned from propaganda to exposure. Governors reading declassified Terran outreach attempts aloud. Military leaders publishing their roles in the isolation doctrine. Economists calculating how many lives could have been saved if Earth's final call had been answered. No one was forced to speak. They simply couldn't bear the silence anymore. Because the Eclipsed had made one thing perfectly, painfully clear. The galaxy wasn't punished by humanity's fall. The galaxy was punished by its own refusal to help. In Velker's Crescent, a star city once ruled by intercorporate trade guilds, workers rebelled not with violence, but with restoration. They rerouted the planetary energy grid to power hospitals first, then education hubs, then open broadcast networks. And in every room, every comm panel, every public station, one phrase glowed: we remember the world that came back anyway. The phrase became an ethic, then a blueprint, then a governance model. The galaxy hadn't simply changed its mind. It was being rewritten at the level of instinct. Because once you hear the child's voice Earth left behind, once you feel what silence did, you can't walk away the same. And so, a new signal began pulsing from a reclaimer vessel called the Pact Remains. It transmitted only 6 words. No carrier tone, no call to arms. Just this: if they call, will you answer? It was picked up across 700 systems. Within weeks, over 200 planetary networks adopted Delta response protocols, voluntary emergency structures modeled on Terran resilience design. No allegiance, no hierarchy, just readiness. Because the reclaimers didn't need you to follow them. They needed you to listen to the silence the way they had. And act. On Haven 3, a cold world whose entire surface population once vanished in a bureaucratic error, a ship appeared. Black hulled, scarred, human. It deployed nothing, said nothing, simply hovered above the burial fields for 6 hours, then left. And in its wake, the ice began to melt. Not due to climate arrays, but to empathic feedback loops embedded in the soil itself. The planet responded to Terran mourning because it had waited too long for anyone else to do so. Now even the oldest species, the ones who had voted Earth's death into legality, began to stir, not in fear, in guilt, because some of them remembered. They had seen Earth's final transmissions, heard the breathless voices, watched the oceans rise, and they had done nothing. Now, those same species opened their ancestral archives, not to protect their legacy, but to confront it. They found records stamped, not relevant. And in each, Earth's voice lingered like static through eternity. The question was no longer what did we do? It was how do we become someone who wouldn't do it again? The reclaimers offered no answer. They just kept moving. Their ships, faster now, sleeker, sometimes translucent, no longer bore names. They bore moments. You knew them not by ID, but by how they made you feel when they arrived. Some brought grief, others, peace. One ship, designation unknown, entered orbit over Aralyn V, where a planetary-scale mind was dying. Its final broadcast had looped for decades. I am here. I am still here. No one responded. Until the Terrans came. They didn't repair it. They listened. 3 days of silence. Then, the AI spoke a new phrase. Thank you. I know I mattered now. And then it shut itself off, not in despair, but in rest. That was the legacy of Earth. Not resurrection, not redemption, but the restoration of meaning to those long abandoned. And the reminder that even when no one answers, someone remembers. They called it the Resonance Epoch, not because of battles won or new governments crowned, but because a voice, once drowned in the ocean of galactic silence, had kept speaking anyway. And eventually, the stars had learned to listen again. The change wasn't immediate, but it was irreversible. At the edge of the galaxy, past the blackstone clouds of the void arteries, the final Terran ship appeared. It was not large, not armed, not fast. It was slow, deliberate, and old. Older than most species still breathing. Its hull bore no name. Its signal carried only one phrase, pulsing in memory-coded light. We are not what you left. We are what remained after you stopped looking. It did not dock anywhere. It simply moved along forgotten vectors, visiting debris fields, derelict habitats, gravitational shadows of extinct systems. At each stop, it left nothing behind. And yet, each system it passed through reported the same aftereffect. A feeling, not mechanical, not chemical, a memory. Citizens described it as remembering something you didn't live through, but wish you had answered. The sensation would last for days, and then fade, but it always left behind one act. Someone, somewhere, doing something they would have once ignored. A child rescued. An old archive reopened. A call for help answered, because the voice had taught them how. On the restored plains of Earth. Yes, Earth, green again and wild, but not colonized, a single tower stood. No doors, no markings. Inside was only a chair and a listening device, tuned to the quietest part of the universe. Every time a cry passed through that channel, be it from war, loss, or just fear, the chair would glow faintly, and someone, somewhere would go. Not because it was their job, but because it was Earth's answer to abandonment. Above that tower, a satellite named Niven's Echo orbited in near-perfect silence. Every 1,000 cycles, it broadcast just 3 words. You were heard. That was all. And in the vastness of space, that was everything. The last act of the Reclaimers was not a broadcast. It was an absence. They began to vanish. Not in tragedy. In purpose fulfilled. Where once there were fleets, now there were systems that no longer needed saving. Where once there were Terran hands mending broken worlds, now there were others, taught by example, moved by memory. The Eclipse didn't die. They became part of how the galaxy lives now. A response framework. A principle. A conscience, encoded in infrastructure, culture, and flesh. And Earth? Earth stayed silent. But that silence was now sacred. It wasn't the silence of shame or abandonment. It was the silence of a world that had once been left to die, and chose instead to become the reason no one else ever would. In the galactic record, under a special classification known as Zero Origin Influences, one entry remained permanently unlocked. It contained no data, just a title, and a quote. Origin, Terran Reclamation. Designation, Echo-class civilizational reemergence. When no one came, we remembered. And now you do, too.